Hello, I'm Graham Peters and I'm MD Government Services for Arqit. I'm also service owner for Arqit's involvement in the UK National Cybersecurity Centre's PQC Migration scheme. I'm really excited to share this lively discussion today with cyber experts from Cambridge Consultants, Frazer Nash and Avella. At Arqit, we work with organisations to provide the visibility and control needed to identify cryptographic risk. And we're hosting this session today to bring together different perspectives from strategy through to implementation, so organisations can better understand how to approach PQC migration in practice and what role each part of the ecosystem plays. So I'm pleased to introduce our panel, Bob Oates from Cambridge Consultants, Lucy Potter from Frazer Nash, and Daryl Flack from Avella. So, Bob, would you like to say a few words about your organisation and yourself, please?
Thanks, Graham. I'm Dr. Bob Oates. I'm a specialist in the cybersecurity of safety critical systems, and I am the technical lead for Cambridge Consultants PQC service. I've got over a decade of experience securing challenging systems and baking security into the engineering process, and I'm an honorary professor of safety and security at De Montfort University. For those of you not familiar with Cambridge Consultants, we're a technical consultancy that is part of Capgemini.
Thank you, Bob. And Lucy, would you like to do some similar intro, please?
Yes, of course. Hi, Graham. I'm Lucy Potter from Frazer Nash Consultancy, where I am a security architect and work on complex system risks. I'm the focal point for post-quantum cryptography in the company, helping organisations integrate quantum readiness into broader engineering assurance and long-term systems resilience decisions.
Thanks, Lucy. And last but by no means least, Daryl.
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Daryl Flack, and I'm the co-founder and partner at Avella Security.
Thanks, Daryl. So I'll just say a few words before we kick off the discussion. So there's been a lot of activity over the last couple of years in post-quantum cryptography. Most notably, the UK NCSC issued guidance last year where it states that it expects organisations to have completed planning for post-quantum migration by 2028. And there are similar roadmaps emerging globally. The US, the EU, other advanced economies will publish similar guidance. And the aim is to complete migration by 2035. But as I said, the most immediate first step is to have a plan by 2028. Major tech providers are moving early. Google and Cloudflare are saying they're targeting the completion of their PQC migration by 2029, so moving much faster than that guidance. So I want to start talking about now, about what is the fuss all about in terms of PQC migration. And why is quantum computing risk becoming a broad level issue? What's driving the urgency to start migrating now? So if we could start with Bob.
Yeah, I think there is broader recognition of this problem at the board level. I think it's getting a lot of publicity. It's difficult to talk about that sense of urgency without mentioning Harvest Now, Decrypt Later, or HNDL. The attackers can be capturing and storing data that is transmitted today using classical encryption in the hope it's still useful when they have the ability to decrypt it. And that's obviously a pressing issue for people who have data that needs to maintain confidentiality for really long periods. So defense, a lot of personal data, medical data, financial data, etc.
Thanks, Bob. So Lucy, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I do agree with Bob that there is getting to be a lot more visibility at the board level and increasing recognition that a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, that's a quantum computer that will be deemed powerful enough to break today's asymmetric encryption algorithms. It's a question of when and not if that's going to be built. This is not a theoretical problem, and it will happen at some point. And when you think about board level visibility of this topic, the reason it's gaining increasing traction at that level is because the cryptographic algorithms that are vulnerable to this type of attack are deployed. They are so widely deployed throughout our infrastructure. that it really makes it more than this isn't just a security or a single department issue. This really is an enterprise-wide issue, which is why it really does need to be looked at the board level. I don't think people really appreciate the scale at which asymmetric cryptography has been deployed and how reliant we are on it on every single day for really mundane interactions. And secondarily, thinking about what accountability the board might have in terms of what decisions were made when this risk became available and what actions they might have been taken. So you need to think about what your reverse accountability is when this becomes a known problem. Did you make the right call at the right time? And what did you decide to do? So I do think it's definitely something that sits at that level.
Thanks, Lucy. So what I'm hearing is the guidance that's being issued by the various governments, that's taking out the debate in terms of when this is going to be a problem, and making sure that organizations start planning is the sort of key thing they need to do. And at board level, they need to recognize that. So Darryl, what would you like to add to that?
So PQC is effectively a transformation update across all teams, your supply chains and your critical systems. And I think quantum risk has accelerated this to a board level because it threatens systemic stability. It demands multi-year investments and it carries direct regulatory liabilities. So the urgency stems from concrete migration deadlines, those long-lived data lifespans that we've been speaking about, and the harvest now and decrypt later threat. And that makes delay not just undesirable, but operationally unacceptable. So in order to achieve it, you need collaboration across the whole board, and that's going to cover finance, that's going to approve budgets, you need operations with the steering committees, there's going to be audit and risk. You're also going to need technology across your CIO and your CTO functions, as well as obviously the CISO function from a security point of view. So the urgency is being driven by the NCSC timelines, but also the recognition that legacy estates and the vendor ecosystems, they require years for inventory testing, hybrid rollouts as well. So data harvested now could be decrypted tomorrow, and that amplifies that harvest now risk in finance's high stakes environments. So proactive firms are going to be integrating PQC into those enterprise upgrade plans.
I'd really like to emphasize Darryl's point that this isn't just a technical issue. It's a business transformation, and it needs to be treated as such, because if you treat it as a solely technical exercise, I don't think it has any chance of success.
Yeah, and we're also seeing that it's an upgrade. It's an upgrade to cryptography. The fact it's PQC is just a label, but it's an upgrade of the entire system. And any organization that doesn't take it seriously will get left behind. We know that leaves organizations then exposed when they're running on old cryptography. They're going to be vulnerable then to other attacks happening and holes in their security. The taking it back to what the cybersecurity agencies are saying, there's a very, very simple message: come up with a plan. In the UK case, it's come up with a plan by 2028. That doesn't really mean you should be waiting until December 2027 to start, should it? So the question is, for the next part of the discussion, is where on earth do you start? Maybe, Lucy, you could kick us off.
You can start pretty small. And I think that's probably something that we need to underline right now. And you can start with finding out where your cryptographic assets are. Now, this doesn't have to be a massive exercise to start with. But if you don't know what you have, then you cannot risk assess against it. You can't manage it, you can't see it, and you can't plan. So the advice is to start that cryptographic discovery and start finding your cryptographic inventory and your assets. But the best thing to do is to start now and start small. Do a pilot. Consider picking one system that you think you understand pretty well, and then go and find your cryptographic discovery, go find your vulnerable algorithms. And this will allow you to then build on that. It will allow you to then build up the tools and techniques to actually then expand this throughout your organization. But don't assume that it has to be done all in one go. But do start doing something. And I think people will be surprised by how much value they can get just from that small activity. Bob's already already alluded to the benefits you can get straight away without even having to plan for PQC migration. Better visibility of your cryptographic estate, better visibility of where your shadow crypto might be, also helps with your general hygiene and general resilience across your system. So you are already getting measurable benefits just by going and starting that discovery process.
Thanks, Lucy. So Darragh, what would you like to add to that?
So I think following on from what Lucy just mentioned, I think securing that executive buy-in to form cross-functional teams is going to be critical. That's across your security teams, your ops teams, procurement, legal, and that's going to need to be led by a single overarching migration owner. You're going to need to conduct a full crypto discovery, as we've spoken about, looking for your algorithms, your keys, your certificates, your protocols, across all of your apps, all of your networks, all of the technology that you have. And you're going to need to assess the data lifetimes and classify those assets by risk, prioritizing the long-lived data and your high-value data over other kinds of data. I think once you've got that executive buy-in, the planning, as we've spoken about, is going to be critical. So building that roadmap with the milestones, short-term pilots on the low-risk areas, and then medium-term for your critical services with long-term directions of travel around your legacy and full estates. So engaging the vendors early is going to be really helpful. So understand your contracts, understand what their roadmaps are, and include any requirements in any RFPs that you may have going out. Designing in your crypto agility is going to be really important, having any hybrid modes where you need it, as well as looking at pure PQC rollouts. And I think finally, the execution and monitoring phase, rolling out in waves, starting with public-facing services, making sure you've got appropriate rollback plans and any continuity testing that may be required. And you're going to need to have an ongoing monitoring and assurance process via your sort of SBOMs, your sort of software bill of materials, having dashboards and audits, so you can update any new algorithms that come on board and have a view to any old classical decommissioned legacy crypto that you're going to need to deal with.
I mean, yes, all of this it's good advice. Cryptographic discovery is really important. I think we do need to send the message, though, that this isn't something that you do once and then just stop. Cryptographic discovery is an ongoing piece. I liked Lucy's point about starting small, and you should be looking at this not just as not just a technical issue, but how do you build capability with pilots, and then move on long term towards going from like this system by system discovery to active monitoring, because you need to be able to detect if you inadvertently introduce systems that are using that legacy cryptography, because your estate's a moving target. It's going to evolve. And I think that when we acknowledge that cryptographic discovery is a dynamic activity and how it feeds into a slightly more continuous migration process, you need to realize that you're not going to hit a finished state with discovery. Every organization has no regret systems that they can start migrating now. They don't need to wait for the discovery to be finished. And I would encourage people to start building that capability too, and picking, again, another pilot system for migration as well as discovery, if you haven't already started.
It was mentioned earlier, actually, that supply chain is really important too. So, Bob, as you referred, your systems don't stay static, and of course, you bring in new suppliers, and so monitoring what happens when you bring new suppliers into your network is really important as well. And obviously, we need to make sure that the suppliers are doing the right things in terms of making sure their systems are PQC compliant as we go forward.
Absolutely. And also you've got your internal supply chain as well, because a lot of organizations write their own software. So you need the right policies and checks in place to make sure you're not kicking out software that is using libraries that rely on that older cryptography. So I think it is a very complex problem. And the supply chain in of itself is, that's an entire podcast that we could talk about, because it's so opaque at the moment for a lot of organizations. They don't actually have a good handle on what cryptography is being used under the hood.
And obviously, this transition affects all sectors, so not just the private sector, but public ones too. We're seeing that some sectors are taking this activity more seriously than others. Finance, for example, are leading the way. Darragh, why do you think that is?
So finance is leading the PQC readiness, I think, because it has the strongest mix of risk, regulation, and complexity. I think because financial services handle long-lived sensitive data, they run trusted critical payment and identity systems. They also depend on huge third-party and legacy estates. And so to inventory and test migrations for those is a lot of work. And also to retrofit those platforms later will be incredibly painful. I think hence the early adopter approach. The harvest now, decrypt later threat is especially severe for financial services too, given their long length of time that they must hold the data for. So the push to start crypto agility work now is required. Otherwise, to wait for it might mean that they don't complete that work until any quantum relevant computer becomes mature. And so financial services can't really afford to wait for a deadline, but that is equally relevant to any sector. I think it equates to financial services mainly having the funds and the resources to undertake some of this work now, which is why we're seeing more activity in the area. But that also underlines why it's so important that NCSC have created the PQC scheme, because it provides a centre of excellence for expertise, so that organisations that don't necessarily have all of those internal resources have the capability to go somewhere and get that expertise that they can trust from an external source.
Thanks. So Bob and Lucy, how do you think some of the learnings from the finance sector and what Daryl just said can apply to other sectors that you're involved with?
Yeah, we're working across quite a lot of sectors. I think the energy sector is a really good example of one that's doing the right thing. They're investing in this, they recognize it, and it's the distributed nature of their technology. You know, you've got distributed energy resource everywhere. They've got a massive amount of legacy technology. I think that's a big issue in OT in general. They have quite a complex system. You know, the delivery of energy as a service, as a single grid, needs a huge number of organizations to work together, communicate. They have bids and markets, and all of these things need to be secure to deliver a trustworthy service. And I think they've recognized that. In terms of what I think we can learn from them and what they maybe have picked from places like financial services is, well, I love GRC, governance, risk and compliance, so I'm a bit biased. I think you can do a lot of good by getting your policy right. Going back to the internal supply chain, making sure your dev teams aren't introducing legacy tech by having really clear cryptography policies, making sure your procurement teams aren't buying in tech that increases that migration burden. Again, you can do that with really nice, clear guidance, checklists, that sort of thing. And we're often all about the tech. And I think, as we've already mentioned, it's all about education and clear communication with the human aspect of your business as well. Those all have a really big part to play.
Yeah, I'd like to build on that and say that what we're also seeing is any sectors that have got multinational concerns, that's quite interesting. It's worth bearing in mind that whilst the NCSC has published guidelines for UK migration with guidelines for migration planning to be complete, other nations are also doing the same. So the EU is doing a big push in this space, as is the US. However, the timelines don't completely align. So one big driver that we've seen, especially for clients possibly consulting into defence and possibly US defence, was the publication of the CNSA 2.0 suite, which mandated migration for those suppliers who were supplying US federal agencies. So multinational organisations need to consider what those drivers might be beyond just the UK guidance, and we have to keep an eye on what's going on in that space. Definitely. I like what Bob said about the business change and the policy aspect of this. And I think what people can definitely take forward is that this is not just an IT issue. People kind of sometimes wrongly characterize it as this is just an IT migration issue. When you think about where this asymmetric cryptography is, it's often in systems that aren't traditionally managed by IT departments. Bob's also mentioned OT. It's also there. So to underline the fact that this is really a whole organization activity, And the need to be able to have the correct policy and governance structures to address this is really something that people need to look at. And Darryl also mentioned that as well. As an organisation, you can have a look now and think, well, what are your existing change management approaches and are they up to scratch? Have you ever done a major technology migration like this before? And if you have, what lessons can you learn from that and bring into PQC? And if you haven't, then what lessons can you apply from elsewhere? So those things all need to be brought to bear when considering, regardless of the sector that you're in.
I'm glad you brought up the issue of the international scene, and in particular, what's happening in the US and elsewhere. So we are seeing more regulation being applied in certain geographies. And interestingly, we would expect more to happen in this regard in the UK. So some of the recent government frameworks like G-Cloud included reference to being compliant with PQC migration advice from NCSC. We would expect to see government levers be used for companies who are selling into government. So if you're taking taxpayers' money in the UK, to be compliant and aligned with NCSC guidance and making sure your systems are being future-proofed in this way. So that's a really interesting way of looking at the government levers that can be used to try and accelerate these things.
I think I'd like to also say, and maybe the first contentious thing of the discussion, if we're going to be awarding medals to sectors for being ahead, I actually think that there is a contender for finance. I think we need to acknowledge the great work being done in telecoms. They've done some fantastic work in terms of recognizing, that confidentiality is a core property of their business model. You need to trust that your phone calls aren't being listened into, and they've really pulled together as a sector internationally, and they've done an amazing job of setting standards that will create the bedrock for this being a solved problem in that sector. So I think they might take gold. I think it depends how they keep the momentum up in the race.
I think that's definitely worth acknowledging. And both those sectors that you've mentioned, they are racing ahead. And I think what's interesting about both those sectors is that confidential, secure, trustworthy comms are really built into their business model. So they really, really do understand and know the use case that cryptography underpins and how that can help deliver business success, and possibly where other industries haven't woken up to that yet. And again, I come back to my cryptography is everywhere and it underpins absolutely everything that you do. I think when organizations look at how much of their trustworthiness as a company, as an organization is underpinned by cryptography, in the way that you're right, telecoms and big cloud and big internet-based companies have, I think that will definitely help drive adoption, because they will understand that their business value is recognized through delivering a safe, trustworthy service, and so much of that is underpinned by cryptography. I think when sectors see that link, that should help drive adoption and migration as well.
Yeah, and I think if I mentioned I'm a big fan of the safety industry, I should say. And if you take the lessons learned from places like nuclear and civil aviation, when they see a big threat like this, they recognize it isn't a threat that they can compete over. If somebody starts to lose faith, they don't lose faith in an individual company, they lose faith in the sector. And that's when they're really good at collaborating. And that, in the safety world, that's very, very common, that people who are essentially competitors, they don't want disasters for anybody. they want it to be they want everyone to move forward. And I think finance and telecoms, again, that's a big driver for them, because you don't lose confidence in a specific organization if the foundations of secure comms are at risk. It's the sector that will suffer. And I think that collaborative approach of setting standards just makes everyone stronger.
Yeah, that's a really, really strong point, actually, Bob, one I hadn't thought of. So clearly there's a lot of preparation, a lot of complexity, and so on that needs to go into planning a migration activity. So question to all three of you, is how can consultancies help? Who'd like to go first?
I'm happy to jump in on this one. I think consultancies can really accelerate the PQC migration by providing that assured expertise in discovery, in planning and execution, especially for complex estates like in finance and in critical national infrastructure. I think NCSC accredited firms provide that trusted expertise and it de-risks the process in order to meet the UK timelines. I think what we generally do when we take on engagements around PQC is we start with that cryptographic discovery. We can do it by using technology, running automated scans, but we also do some manual mapping of algorithms and data flows and looking at dependencies across your apps and your hardware security modules and your vendor systems and looking at all of those critical inventories by 2028, that key NCSC deadline.
Yeah, and another thing that consultancies can bring is, and we've mentioned this before about the fact that we work across a range of sectors. So we do see the different sector approaches and how maybe one challenge that's solved in one sector can be applied to another. For an organisation doing their PQC migration and their inventory, this is the first time that they've done it, possibly. So bringing in a consultancy that's already got experience of advising and delivering that work with other clients and in other sectors definitely helps reduce the risk around that activity, and it ensures that best practice is being followed. With respect to the NCSC scheme assuring the consultancies, all three of our companies are members of that scheme, and what that means is that organisations can have confidence in the fact that our companies have passed a standard that is monitored by the NCSC, so they can be confident in the fact that the quality of the advice that we're giving and the quality of the support that we're giving in issues not just technical but also planning related are of the very best quality and do align to the NCSC guidelines.
Yeah, I was just going to say that obviously there's a shout out needs to be given to NCSC for the PQC assurance scheme. So obviously the four of us have all met through that vehicle, and that's something that the UK is doing ahead of probably a number of other countries in coming up with a scheme like this to help organisations navigate their way through this complex problem.
If you look at the skills you need to do this well, you've got cryptography, the nuances of how quantum computing interacts with the timelines to help you prioritize. You've got embedding cryptography and new cryptography into products. And as we've already discussed, that's not a like-for-like swap. And you've got digital transformation. And all of these are quite rarefied, quite complex skills. And not every organization needs them all year round. And certainly not every organization can afford them all year round. And if it's somebody who is a deep specialist in this, they might spend some of the time twiddling their thumbs. So it makes economic sense for industry to get consultants in to support those difficult bits and work with the team and the capability they have. And it makes strategic sense for the country to make sure that those limited pot of people who understand these different aspects are supporting as many organizations as possible. And perhaps the other thing is, because it is, as I mentioned earlier, you've got these high risk, big bang migrations, you kind of want to bring to bear as much capability as you can on those activities to de-risk some of that challenge.
I think that's right. And I think the cost of getting this wrong cannot be overstated. Therefore, even if you have that capability in-house of those resources, getting some external assured validation of the work you're doing to check that homework can be really valuable, especially when you're reporting up to the board. So that external expertise is valuable even in those environments where you're confident that you have the capability to deliver what you need to.
And not only that, because we do belong to a community of consultancies that are looking at this problem, and we also contribute generally to the community knowledge and expertise in this area. We're all of us working with the NCSC to identify ways in which we can de-risk areas in the UK PQC migration challenge. We're all part of that conversation. We're all keeping up to date. And many of our companies also engage in research opportunities to do de-risking in slightly more esoteric areas that might not have an immediate economic benefit, but are definitely need to be doing. So consultancies also bring expertise from that area to bear that a normal commercially driven organization might not be able to leverage.
So clearly there's plenty of ways that organizations thinking about their PQC migration project can benefit from both consultancies and, of course, in Arqit's case, the provision of discovery tooling that can start the first steps in coming up with a really strong plan that will meet those guidance coming from the likes of NCSC to have a plan in place by 2028. And thank you all. That was a really good discussion. As you've heard, this is really a broad level issue and it needs organizational buy-in, and there are some real deadlines that need to be met. You need a plan by 2028. We've also heard how different sectors are taking a lead, with finance and telecoms being sectors who come together to solve this problem. And we've also put forward the case for consultants who can provide real benefits to support organizations in this work. You don't need all the expertise and tooling in-house. You know your organization, and the consultants have the expertise on migration that can help you. And finally, you can start small. And Arqit's encryption intelligence product allows you to perform automated cryptographic discovery as a first, no-regret step. To learn more, see the links below or contact one of the relevant speakers. Thank you for listening.